We'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast was produced, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present.
It's the 9th of December 2019 and we're about 48 kilometres off the coast of New Zealand. The boat we're on is full of excited tourists heading to Whakaari White Island, one of New Zealand's most active volcanoes. Every day, boats like this one arrive to see the incredible wonders that nature's created over the last 150,000 years. Leading the tour is Kelsey Waghorn. She's been showing people around the island for the last 5 years. Today, she leads the tour just like she does every other day. The tourists make their way down into the Moonlight Crater, and she gives her safety briefing. Hard hats need to stay on. Gas masks should be worn to stop sulfur dioxide that's pumping out of the volcano from burning their throats. And if anything happens, seek cover behind one of the island's rocky mounds. It's the same old safety briefing she's repeated hundreds of times. But this time it's different. Today, this is information their lives depend on. I'm Matt Middleton and this is Head Game. Today, how Kelsey Waghorn survived a volcanic eruption. Kelsey Waghorn, thank you ever so much for joining me on my podcast, Head Game. Now, you are a survivor of a volcanic eruption. And when I mean volcanic eruption, you were literally on the volcano. But before we get into that, Kelsey, how did it come about you becoming a tour guide for volcanoes?
I studied marine science at uni and a bit at high school as well, and fell in love with being on the ocean. Never intended to be on a volcano. That was not the end goal. I just wanted to be on boats. And so 3 years of study, I did a lot of diving, so scuba diving, and a lot of exploring. We went to Papua New Guinea, went to quite a few of the islands around New Zealand as well, did a lot of diving. And so when I finished my 3-year degree, I just wanted a job on a boat. And there happened to be a job going for tours to White Island, which is actually in my hometown. So that takes about an hour and a half on a boat out to the volcano, and managed to score a job on the boat, basically, which had a side of volcano. I just wanted to be on the boat.
In a way, you found yourself in a boat, but did you find it fascinating? Were you quite excited about the job? And what really sort of sparked your interest to go, yeah, do you know what? I'm going to take this. This is really cool.
Initially, it was just the boat side of things.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be out in the sea. It was never intended to be anything more than a summer job. So I just thought, get some time on the boat, get my hours up, and then obviously I can go and get a real job. Basically become more marine friendly, I guess, and boat friendly. Did my first summer, saw a whole lot of wildlife, so dolphins, whales, sharks, fish, all, you name it. And thought, well, this is actually pretty cool. And then stayed through the winter, and it basically just happened like that for 5 years. And initially I was only interested in the boat, and I learnt the bare minimum for the volcano. I didn't learn a lot of volcanology outside of what I had to know, and then would just bulk it up. When I was asked questions, I would go and find answers. And then obviously I had that for next time. But we had some eruptions happen, and obviously being a live volcano, things would change quite frequently. The gas output would change, so you get different colours on the island. The crater lake would change colour. Just seeing the place change the way that it did kind of made me think, oh, maybe this isn't lame. Maybe I should learn some more. And so I started putting in a little bit more effort into my knowledge of volcanology. And then when we had scientists come out on the volcano to either study it or just to learn some more to bulk up their education, basically I picked their brain and slowly became interested in the volcano.
How excited and how sort of unprepared really were tourists? The awareness isn't really there for them, is it? It's just a day trip for them to get on and off, to get their picture done, and away they go.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people were there for the Instagram photo for social media.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of times where you would explain something and then they would come up to you about 5 seconds later and be like, oh, so what's this? And it's like, oh, if you tuned in 5 seconds earlier, I just told you about it. So there were a lot of times where it was like people were more like, it was so captivating visually that I think people were just like, I don't care what you're saying. I just want to take this in. And then by the time that they had taken in what they wanted to take in and got their photos, then they had questions about what they were actually seeing. So by that stage, it's like, well, I just talked about that, but that's okay. I think a lot of people were expecting more Hawaii type volcanoes, the lava flows, being able to see the lava, that sort of stuff. But White Island's not typically that kind of volcano. Unfortunately for us, it's a lot more explosive rather than like the big runny bits of lava and all that sort of stuff. We don't tend to have that out at White Island. Not for a very long time anyway.
So you're responsible for quite a lot of people on a daily basis, especially if you're getting boats full. Take me through the actual day of the eruption, and I can imagine it was just another day, another dollar, right?
Yeah, up until it wasn't normal, everything was stock standard. I wasn't actually scheduled on for that day. I'd actually hurt my thumb about 4 or 5 days beforehand, so I was still trying to heal that up. I was living on a farm then, and I'd actually posted a story on Instagram moving cows somewhere. So a lot of people actually later on didn't think that I was actually on the island that day, so thought I was sweet because they were like, oh, she's on the farm. She posted a video, so it's all good. But yeah, got the call up to come in because we had a cruise ship coming over from Tauranga, which is about an hour away from us. And so they were due in, must have been about midday-ish. And so, yeah, got asked to come in. And so I was like, yeah, that's sweet as. If someone can be my left hand, because, yeah, still a bit sore. So, yeah, as long as someone can be my left hand, do the heavy lifting, then, yeah, that's sweet as. Got into work, and one of my co-workers, Hayden, who I worked with for 5 years, he actually trained me. He was like, oh, how's your thumb? And I was like, oh, still a bit sore, but it's okay. And he's like, oh, do you want to wrap it? And I was just like, nah, I think it'll be all right. And he's like, no, we'll wrap it. I'll wrap it for you. And he was very particular about wrapping it. I remember giving him shit about it. And he was, taking ages to like wrap it and, giving him hell for it. Got the boat ready for the day, loaded the passengers on the boat, and, basically started heading out to the island. So it was all normal.
And you've got a boat full of excited tourists, again, no change and same procedure. You get out and do your thing, right?
Yep. So landed on the island. We were the last boat of the day. And so, we got there and we were the second or third boat at the island. And there were already 2 helicopters on the island. Did all the usual normal level 2 procedure, additives of the higher level of activity or output of gas. So it is a level 2, which is higher than normal. But in my 5 years of being there, it had been level 2 many times and never erupted. And then it had been a level 1 and erupted. So, not overly predictable. Continued on with our day. Nothing was unusual. Went around the island. As I said, we weren't the first on the island, so no one had picked anything up. Nothing alerted us that something was brewing, for lack of a better word.
So when do you actually realise that actually something is brewing and something serious is brewing? The red flags are coming up, and if I don't put something into action now, we're not going to get off this island.
Immediately.
Oh, immediately.
Yeah. So there's always gas output, always steam output. There's always bubbling water and whatnot around the island. So that's stock standard. So none of that raised any alarm bells. But I was talking about one of the streams that we were standing in, because it's this little like fresh water stream. I just remember people just started going, oh, wow, look at that. I just remember turning around and seeing the island erupting. And it was already bigger than the island. And so the island is 321 meters tall. And the stack or the column of material coming out of the island was already bigger than that and growing by the second. So, it was an immediate, this ain't right.
And you knew, did the others know?
Yeah, I do think that they just thought it was part of the tour. Because unbeknownst to me, I've only found out since, that people were actually taking photos of it. It wasn't until people started saying, well, look at that I turned around, because it was actually erupting silently behind us, which you'd think it would be like sonic boom material sort of thing, but didn't shake the ground, didn't make a noise.
How far away was it from you?
Maybe 300-400 meters. So not that far.
Wow.
Yeah, so
Yes.
too
Not that
close.
far at all.
Too close. Yeah, turned around and it was, full eruption. And I immediately just basically I just yelled at everyone to just come with me and just started running. And I think maybe that's when they realized that this wasn't part of the tour. We all just took off and hid behind this mound. In my head, it was this giant mound because I've been there so many times that, I was just like, we'll get behind this big mound. It'll be great. Like, we'll just get behind that. Once it settles down, we'll just trot off back to the boat and that'll be a great day.
By the sounds of it, you go down there. You're not, you're like, this mound will do this. Will protect us. When did you suddenly realise that? No, it won't. This is a lot more serious than just hiding behind a mound.
I mean, initially when there was kind of the big vertical column, it was like, well, that's not good. But as long as it stays where it is, that's the best we can hope for. Because we were 300-400 meters away. So it was one of those things where we'll get shelter, assess it, and then make moves from there. But I guess in my mind, it was like, well, this is just like our drills. So we'll take shelter and then take stock of things there. Got behind this mound, and worst possible case scenario in this was that we had a pyroclastic surge. And if you do any research into those, which I've done a little bit of research into these, because there wasn't much to research other than you don't survive them.
What is that? Can you just break that down for me? What's a pyroclastic surge?
Pyroclastic surge.
Can't even pronounce it.
So, in, I guess, layman's terms, it's the column came up. You have the big ejection of acid, gases, material, sort of ash, rock, all that business. It goes shooting up with all that force behind it. Then obviously you've got all this heavy material which just can't keep shooting up because we have gravity. And so the column basically starts to collapse. And if you've seen a video of the eruption or any of these sorts of things, you get that massive plume at the bottom, that big wave that comes out at the bottom. That is what got us. And so that was always worst case scenario. I think I've heard the stats of surviving that are basically they're less than 10%, even less than 5%. So it was always like, if you saw one of them, it was like a white flag moment. You were just like, well, that I can't do anything. I can't fight this. Like, you know what it is. Took shelter, turned around, group still running in. Keep in mind that this is less than a minute that we've done this in. I remember my other guy coming up next to me and I just said, it'll be okay. And then I looked up and I saw the surge coming towards us. And it was like, dope. This is how we go.
Wow. Your worst nightmare is now descending upon you, right?
Yeah. And this is like, it's not a slow moving thing, but in my mind, because everything was going so fast, it did look slower than it actually was. And so for a split second, I did think maybe we can make it further down the island. But looking at the group, not knowing everyone's fitness levels, their agility levels, because it's not a flat paved terrain, it's all rock and everything underneath your feet. So it was like, it's not going to be an easy run. And I have no idea if, for one, I can do it, let alone these people that I've met for the last 2 hours. So it was basically just like, we'll just wait it out. Like, there's nothing else to do here. We'll just white flag it and hope for the best.
How was your command and control at this stage? Obviously, knowing what you know and them being naive to volcanoes, what's your strategy to keep them calm?
Unfortunately, there was like seconds. So there wasn't actually a lot of time to have this conversation, delegate this sort of situation. So it was kind of a more, we're taking cover, and by the time I basically spotted this and quickly run the analysis of whether we could run it or not, decided no, it was like gas mask on and it was hitting us. So the whole eruption lasted less than 2 minutes and we probably lost maybe 20-30 seconds at the start before I even knew it was happening. So it was basically just, there was no time to explain what was happening. And I don't know if that would have helped or hindered the situation anyway.
Just straight into your safety drills.
Yeah, so it was basically just follow the drill, and it was basically just get down, gas mask on. I fetal positioned. I was like, well, at least that's all I can do. It was just like, I had my sunglasses on, I had my gas mask on, and I thought, well, if there's any hope, which was very, very minimal, it was like, well, I need to be able to see and I need to be able to breathe. So I had my sunglasses on, I had my gas mask on, and I just basically held it to my face. You try to breathe slow in those situations because you know that keep your heart rate down, try and stay calm. But it was just like my body was just like, you're about to die, dude. So it was full panic breathing. And then the pyroclastic flow hit us and it all went dark. And I want to say it was quiet, but it wasn't. It was like being on a beach on a really hot day, on a really hot, windy day. And so you could feel things all swirling around, and it basically just kept getting hotter and hotter and hotter. It got to the point where I started hearing everyone else around me screaming, and I thought I was on fire. And I basically just started vibrating because I was trying so hard to keep my hands to my face. But I got to the point where I just had to start swatting my arms because I was just like, I need to put this fire out. And then basically the pyroclastic surge stopped. So we made it out the other side. And so it slowly just went calm and it just went quiet. You could just hear sort of some whimpering from people around us. And yeah, just sort of stayed still for a few seconds and thought, is there a second wave? Or like just kind of waited it out for a second. Slowly took my sunglasses off to have a look around, see what was going on. And yeah, basically decided in that second, it was like, we've got to move now or we're not going anywhere. We've survived the unsurvivable, so let's go.
How hard was it to hold that composure, or did it actually help that you had the responsibility ultimately, that everyone was looking to you to get everyone off the island, was looking to your experience, was looking for your knowledge, was looking to you to stay alive?
I mean, none of that crossed my mind. I took my sunglasses off. I took my gas mask off. Somewhere my helmet got off at some point, my backpack off, basically just started taking everything off. Realized that it wasn't fire that was burning us. It was actually acid. So there was actually no fire. And once I actually saw the state of my hands, which you can imagine basically candle wax, it was just my skin was just starting to just come off. It was like, oh, that's what that was. And basically from there, it was just like, we got to go, because I don't know if there's a second round, or because we won't make a second round. So it was like, we got to go now or it's never. So I just got up and I just started yelling at everyone to get up. Someone said to me, we're really hurt, we can't move. And I just said, so am I. And I just said, get up, we got to go. I don't remember saying
do you
it.
Die? Yeah, exactly. Do you want to die in sympathy, or do you want to, get the hell out of here? Let's go.
It was always joked that I was the sergeant major at work, and it actually came into a real good effect for a change.
We're getting well, Kelsey, you and me.
So yeah, just basically just ordering everyone around, and yeah, basically just said, you got to get up, we got to move. And once people started to get up and move, I just said, you got to follow me, follow where I walk. And rather than take the track, I just beelined it straight for our wharf, which was maybe 200 meters away. Basically just power walked, taking off the rest of my gear, keeping on my clothes, obviously. But yeah, just taking off gas mask, the rest of it that was still hanging on. And yeah, the group followed, thankfully, made it down to the wharf where one of the boats, the boat that had just left the island when we got there, had only made it to the northern side of the island, and where you enter the island is the southeastern side. And so we were just getting to the wharf at the southeastern side, and the boat that had left when we got there came roaring around the corner. Our boat that we came out on had been hit by this pyroclastic flow, so our white brand new boat was now grey and covered in ash. Thankfully, the other boat came back and they started picking us up and they put us on their boat. And so the poor people on that boat that had evaded this eruption now had, I think it was about 25 of us ended up on that boat, not in a great state.
Wow.
And they basically became our first aid responders, some of which had probably never done first aid in their lives. But yeah, I think we owe them our lives, if not our limbs. And yeah, the whole hour trip home on that boat, it was going as fast as it could.
And you were slowly melting, right? Your body was slowly falling apart.
Yeah.
An hour on the boat, that must have felt like 10 hours.
It was the longest hour of my life.
Yeah, I can, do you know what? I can imagine. And do you realise how bad you are when you're on that boat, when you've got time to actually, think, because an hour is a long time?
Nah, it actually never crossed my mind. Because we survived the unsurvivable, it never again crossed my mind that we could still die. It never, ever crossed my mind. So the whole trip home, I just was looking at my hands and they looked pretty grim. And by this point, like everything had started swelling as well. So that wrapping that had been put on my hand by Hayden, I was just yelling at the skipper to get it off my hand because it was just starting to restrict my hand. So he got that off, and on the trip home, it never crossed my mind that we weren't out of the woods yet. It was like, well, we've survived that, and we weren't supposed to, so we're all good now in my head. But we had a paramedic dropped off on the boat from the Coast Guard, met us about halfway. Somewhere along the line, they've been told that, there'd been an eruption and that some of the passengers were injured. So they were thinking broken legs. You can imagine the look on their faces when they pulled up alongside our boat and realised what they were dealing with and how ill-equipped they were when they pulled into how many people were on this boat that needed urgent medical attention. They did an incredible job at looking after us with what they had. We had a trainee doctor who was actually one of the other staff on the boat, and she was just amazing. She basically ran the whole first aid crew on the way home. We got back to the wharf, and it was like every single fire engine, ambulance, police, anyone of importance, first responders was at the wharf. And somehow, as we were pulling into the wharf, I managed to spot I remember seeing my sister, my nana, and my mum. And I remember looking at my hands thinking they cannot see me like this. And so we pulled into the wharf, and they wanted I can't remember if they wanted to do like a name check or what order they wanted to get us off in. But I was just like, no, I'm getting out of here. And so I got up. Yeah. By this point, everything had started to like really seize because I've been sitting for an hour, and burns restrict. So burnt tissue restricts. So I couldn't straighten my arms. I couldn't straighten my legs. So I was kind of like full Quasimodo T-Rex arms trying to get off the boat. Couldn't go off the back because it was close to mum and my family. So I was like, I'm going off the front. So managed to convince the other worker on the boat who was not injured. I was like, I'm going off the front. And she was like, what? And I was like, help me up. And her dad had got on the boat, and they basically just pushed me up off the front of the boat and went to put me in an ambulance, and went to the local hospital. I have some police friends who then told my family that I was in an ambulance on the way to hospital. And so they basically raced over to the hospital expecting to see me straight away. And I kept telling all the paramedics, all the doctors, don't you dare let them in until you get my pain under control. And so I actually don't remember seeing them because by the time they did see me, I was so hopped up on drugs that I don't remember seeing them.
You didn't know?
Nah, I had no idea.
So this happens all so quick, right? This happens super fast. You jump off the boat. Before you know it, you're whisked away. But you see your mum and your family, and you're thinking, right, pride is sort of kicking in. I don't want them to worry. I don't want them to see me like this. When do you realise that I'm far from out of the woods? This is serious.
I didn't know how bad any of it was until about 3 or 4 weeks later. So, I got flown from our local hospital to basically the other end of the North Island in Hutt Hospital. And as soon as we got to this hospital, which I got flown down in a Air Force helicopter. And if you know anything about New Zealand's Air Force, is we don't really have any Air Force. So I was pretty lucky. Went in this helicopter, flew all the way to the bottom of the North Island, got whisked away basically straight away. Mum came with me in the helicopter. When we got there, because there was 2 people in the helicopter, it was me and another guy. And when we got there, she thought, oh, it's a massive team. It's for both of us. It was just for one of us. And so they basically just threw me out of the ambulance from the helicopter and straight into theatre because we'd been prepped in my local hospital. They did the most incredible job of prepping us for surgery. So we were ready to go as soon as we got there. And then mum didn't see me until about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock the next morning. And I was on ventilator. I was in a coma. And basically they were just like, we don't know if she's going to make it or not because burns are so complicated.
Wow. So you must have been seriously, seriously bad. Do you remember waking up from the coma?
I do, actually. I remember thinking, why am I in a tent? A tent is not very hygienic. And I think that was because my eyes had been closed for 5 days. And so I think in between my eyes being closed, all the medication, and then because I did have some superficial burns on my face, they were covering it in paraffin wax, something like that, to basically hydrate these burns. and I think it had got in my eyes, and so I couldn't see straight. And so I thought I was in a tent. I remember waking up thinking I can't breathe because I actually still was intubated. They still had the tube down my throat. And I remember my dad's voice. I remember my dad saying, "It's all right, just calm down. Like, they're going to pull it out. You just need to calm down." And I was just like, I couldn't move. And because I was trying to get my arms up to pull whatever it was out of my throat, and I couldn't move, and I could hear dad's voice. I couldn't see anything. And it was just this very confusing, horrible experience. Don't remember them pulling out the tube, which I'm quite grateful for. And then there was a very weird sort of 2 weeks where I was so heavily medicated. Yeah, I was hallucinating. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what was going on. My family knew the severity of what was going on with both me and back home with the aftermath of what had happened. But they were told by the nurses, unless you want to tell her more than once, don't tell her until she's off this medication. Because they said it's going to be like 50 first dates. You're going to have to tell her every day, maybe every hour, what has happened. So I knew that I'd been burnt, and I knew that I'd had surgery to fix it. And other than that, I thought we'd all survive. We were all in hospital getting fixed up, and it was all hunky-dory. And it wasn't until I was actually moved from ICU to the burns ward, and maybe a week later, that the trainee doctor, friend of mine who was on the boat on the way home, she came down to visit me on her way to the South Island for a holiday and a well-earned break. She came in to say hello, and Mum did actually warn her on the way in, like, she doesn't really know the extent of things. If it comes up, we'll deal with it then. And because she came in, we're chatting away, and I just said, "How's Hayden?" I just said, "I haven't heard from Hayden," which is really weird because I would have thought he'd be in here telling me to get out of bed and shit like that. And I just remember her looking at my family and bursting into tears. And I was kind of like, oh my God, what has happened? I kind of had an inkling that things weren't good because every time I'd bring him up, someone would change the subject. But because I was kind of not quite lucid, I'd sort of be like, that's weird, and then just go along with it because I couldn't really keep my train of thought. And it wasn't until this moment where it all kind of came out that, yeah, Mum said he hadn't made it, and then basically said, and it was like, but I made it. It's ridiculous. Like, of course he made it. And then basically it all came to a head there where it was all explained, like people had died. Hayden had never made it off the island. Yeah, and so that's where it all basically came undone, where, yeah, I found out what had actually happened after we got off.
How many people were on the island that day, Kelsey?
Yeah, there were 47 on the island. 22 died. And so that, what does that make? 25 survived. So we had over half survive, which theoretically shouldn't have happened. Over half of us should have not made it. So, incredibly, incredibly lucky, and also incredibly unlucky.
What are the extent of your injuries at this time?
Burns to 45% of my body, all of which were full thickness. So that means every layer of skin was burnt down to the muscle and further. So I've got bits of muscle scraped out, basically. All the burnt tissue had to be removed in those real early days. So that first sort of week while I was in the coma, they're basically removing all that burnt tissue, which then meant obviously they have to replace that tissue with something because they can't just leave you open. So all the tissue that had managed to survive, because they were chemical burns, not thermal burns, it was the areas of the skin that were exposed. And so I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt because it was a hot day. So basically t-shirt line to fingertips was burnt, short line to boot line was burnt, and then my lower back got burnt because when I crouched down, when the pyroclastic flow came over, my bag must have pulled my shirt up.
Wow, so you are in a bad way. You are literally hanging in there, and then you get hit with this news. What does it do to your headspace? What does it do to your mind?
Oh, devastated, because I kind of had a feeling that perhaps he hadn't made it, but I refused to believe it because it was like, well, he trained me, so if anyone's going to survive, it's obviously the trainer, because that otherwise wouldn't make sense. But for some reason, it makes sense in my brain. Because his group was right behind us, when we were walking off the island, I kept looking back. To see where his group was, because I had actually intended to get my group to the wharf and I'll go back and find Hayden if I haven't seen him by then. But by the time we got back to the wharf, and by the time obviously adrenaline had started wearing off, I was in a lot of pain and I got told to get in the boat. So I was like, yeah, I'll get in the boat. And then, my boss who picked us up, I just said, I can't find Hayden. I can't see him. And he was like, don't worry about it. I'll go back and get him. And I was like, okay, he's got it. So that's all cool. But then obviously got told that he hadn't made it, which, it did cross my mind because as we're leaving on the boat, I still couldn't see him coming off the island, which was, I knew he'd be walking off if he was coming off. So it was weird not to see him. But finding out in hospital, because I was so removed from everything that had happened back home, and like by this point, I'd actually already missed his funeral. Like his funeral had already happened by the time I found out. So none of it felt real. It all just felt very weird and surreal. Like I knew I was injured because that I could see it, but the rest of it outside of those four walls of my room didn't exist. And I was hearing about all this other stuff that was going on, but to me it was just like, oh yeah, it's just this fantasy story because none of it's happening. So it was quite good actually being so far away because it just kept all that out. So all I had to focus on was my physical recovery and like my physio and getting moving again and stretching skin and all that sort of stuff. So it kept me very focused on the here and now. So everything that was happening in hospital was all I could focus on. So kind of a blessing in disguise, really.
And was there a sense of you, and you briefly mentioned it then, he's my trainer. What, why him and not me? Was that going through your head whilst you were going through your recovery as well?
Yes and no. We'd sort of had a little like lighthearted debate in the morning about who was going to be in the first group, who was going to be in the second group, because we were both the senior guides. So because it was a cruise ship, we were on quite a tight time schedule. So being the senior guides, we were like, well, we'll run the tour because we can do it fastest. So he was like, well, do you think you can keep up with me? And I was just like, I doubt you can keep up with me, mate. So we're having that banter being like as to who was going to go in first group. And so he was like, well, look, I'll go in the second group because I can push you if you're going too slow. And I said, mate, you won't catch me. And so that was how we ended up in those groups. And so it could have very easily been the other way around where he was in the first group and I wouldn't have made it in the second group. So yeah, it was luck of the draw really as to which group we were in that day, unfortunately.
Yeah. And how long does it take for you to recover physically and get out of hospital? And how hard was it to recover if you've recovered at all?
Initially, I thought, well, this is the worst it can ever be in hospital. And then when I first came out of hospital, the physio, stretching skin, like being able to feel your skin when you move is like, it's just the weirdest and most horrible feeling. And then because I guess all the nerve endings were cauterized by the burning as well. So there was both numbness and hypersensitivity. And so you touch things and it would just theoretically, because it doesn't do it anymore, but make your skin crawl. And so it was just, the desensitization and just trying to get everything stretching again and even getting the muscles moving. Like when I was told I was going to have to learn how to walk again, I just laughed at them and I was like, I'm 25. I've been walking for 23 years. So I don't have to learn how to walk. It's been 2 weeks. And the first time they stood me out because I'd been laying down for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Oh, it was probably more like 4 weeks. All the blood basically just ran to my feet and my legs and feet just went black from all the blood. And so I was just like, what the fuck is this? And it was just like, I possibly got warned, but I don't remember it. And it was just like, this is the most insane thing. And then trying to move, I forgot I had ankles. And so when I went to learn how to walk, I would lift my foot and I would lift my leg from my hip. So I'd tilt my whole pelvis to lift my leg. And I dragged my foot along the ground because I forgot that I could actually just lift my foot up to sort of then heel toe. So even just things like that, like the most basic things, like forgetting about joints that I have owned my entire life and having to use them. So I thought that was the worst it would ever be because, you're in the thick of it. It's like, how can this possibly get any worse? This is horrific. Like, this sucks. And it wasn't until maybe April, May, I was at home and we were actually in our first lockdown for COVID. And so I was actually quite grateful for COVID because the lockdown meant people couldn't come and see me because I couldn't be bothered dealing with people at this point and having the same conversations over and over again. But unfortunately, my sister had been on a flight and come home to my parents' place, and someone on her flight had actually been testing positive for COVID. And so because she'd been around my parents and I was deemed a high risk for infection and complications if I got COVID, I couldn't see my family for about 3 weeks. And so we'd gone from basically living in the same room for 2 months to not being able to see each other. And so that was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, not having my support people there, right there with me.
What does that do to your mindset?
It destroyed me. Like, I was living with my partner at the time, and so I had him with me, and he was incredible. But like, even the district nurses who were looking after me post discharge from hospital, they'd not dealt with burns like this. They'd not, I don't think, ever seen burns like this. And so even they didn't really know what to do with me. So we were telling them what to do. We were telling them how to change my dressings. So it was kind of like, holy shit, it's just the two of us, like, trying to figure this out. But thankfully, my team back in Hutt Hospital was still available for troubleshooting. So I was messaging them at the other end of the island in a lockdown, trying to get help for my recovery. And I just started physio, and I was now having to do that through the computer. And it was like, it's not the same. And so you're having to like stand in a room basically doing like Zumba with your physio on the TV screen. And you're just kind of like, this is silly. Like, I should be seeing someone and getting proper help for this. And then, basically just things went from bad to worse once sort of the physical side of things started calming down, and I got more independent and physically more confident, and the physical side started to wind down in terms of recovery. My brain was like, now's a really good time to unpack the mental side. And so Pandora's box basically just sprung open. And I went from being all right about it all to basically I was terrified all the time. I'd just cry uncontrollably and just panic because I was just thinking about like what Hayden went through, sort of thing. And so it was PTSD.
How long after your recovery, or how long after the incident, did it hit you? Because this is really, really important, because people think that they've recovered, physically, and then they naturally go through this mental battle as well. How long after the actual event did the PTSD kick in?
Started rearing its head in that first lockdown. So that was April. So that's 4 or 5 months after the eruption. It was probably a lot of stress of not being around my family that maybe kicked it off, or it could have just been that as an isolated incident. About a year later, it properly started to, I guess, infiltrate my entire life. And it was fully fledged by this point, and it had taken the wheel, and it had basically taken over my life. I was, absolutely uncontrollable fits of rage. I would just go absolutely numb. I couldn't feel anything physically, mentally, emotionally. I was always prepared to run. I was always facing a door. I always had my exit strategy planned. It was just, it's exhausting. Like, you hear PTSD and you just hear about the rage side of it, the anger side of it. They don't tell you about the hypervigilance side of it. And that's probably almost worse. It's just this fully just always thinking the worst is just about to happen. So always on edge. It's destroyed a lot of relationships in my life. Through actually losing those relationships, it actually kicked me up the ass hard enough to actually keep trying to find the right help, because I thought I had the right help for me, but it obviously wasn't doing enough, unfortunately. And so starting to lose the relationships, and all the relationships I deemed the most important in my life. Basically it kicked me up the ass enough to keep looking, to keep trying to find this help. Thankfully, I found the help, and it absolutely turned my life around. I think I'm probably the happiest, maybe most sane or most insane I've ever been in my life. I went from basically being a full hermit to saying yes to everything. So I've done a full 180, which is probably in itself a trauma response. But it's just like, any door that opens in front of me, I'm charging through it.
She's completely lost it now.
I've gone from full hermit to just full send it. So it's a whole different level of stress now.
And Kelsey, on a serious note, what's harder for you, or what is harder, the physical recovery or the psychological recovery? Because it sounds like the psychological recovery really, really bit you after you were already down anyway. Did you find that harder than the physical recovery? And are you still recovering psychologically?
Oh yeah, 100%. At least with the physical injury, you can see the progress. You can feel the progress. There's timelines on things where the doctors are like, yeah, within about 6 months, this will happen, and you can see it happening. Like there's those milestones you can reach. So there's that light at the end of the tunnel and you can see it all happening. Psychologically, for me, the things that would set me off would change every time. So it was like I didn't know what was going to set me off from day to day. And I just did not have a handle on it at all. I didn't know what was going on. It was a whole nother level of terrifying. But yeah, I physically now good. I have hopefully my last surgery in July. Fingers crossed that was my last. But I've said that for the last 4 or 5. And then, yeah, psychologically, yeah, best I think I've ever been, even pre-eruption. I've got the best team behind me, and my family have been just, my rock. They've actually explained the PTSD to me, like what it actually does to you on like a nervous system level. Like this is why this is happening. Like this is why this trigger has affected you the way that it has. This is why this is important to do. Like they broke it down, and it was just like when you understand it, you're like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. No wonder that's happening. And so even just that understanding, you have a lot more compassion for yourself and the reason it's actually happening in the first place. So yeah, understanding was a massive turning point for me, because then from there you can sort of be curious. You're like, okay, well, if that's what's testing it, how can I strengthen this so that it doesn't happen again? And touch wood, I was actually discussing this morning with my psych. Touch wood, in the last year, I think I can count 1 or 2 times I've had the PTSD rear its head. So here's hoping, thus far this year, nothing. So long may it continue. And obviously it's going to be a maintenance thing now where I have to keep that dog behind the gate. It's just going to be a maintenance thing probably.
But I think within life, with your mindset, with your headspace, not only in traumatic situations, but it's a constant work in progress. How resilient have you become? And I'm talking not only physically, but psychologically resilient have you become from that experience?
Oh, tenfold. I mean, you don't have to go through something horrific to strengthen your mind. You should be working on that sort of stuff every day so that if something like this happens, you are more resilient to actually even withstand it from the get-go. So I mean, now whenever I'm inconvenienced, I don't blow up at it like I used to 2 years ago. I'm able to withstand it a lot better because of the work that I've been doing and the help that I've been getting. I have a lot more resilience now. And so, I mean, if I could show you my schedule, you'd be like, wow, that's intense. So, like I said, I've gone from 0 to 100 and I've just taken on everything. And like in the last, I think over the weekend, I did like 750 kilometers to go from basically one side of the island to the other, purely to go and deliver a talk to some 14-year-old boys on the Friday night, and then end up on the other side of the coast to go to a vineyard for the night. So I'm just basically saying yes to everything and just basically making up for lost time now. So, I'm running myself ragged, but it's all for good stuff now, which is good. It's not fear-based. It's just I've done the work to actually make my life enjoyable. And so now I'm just enjoying it.
Awesome. Kelsey, you're amazing. Thank you so much. And listen, keep that busy schedule going. Keep that mind occupied.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining me on Head Game. If you or anyone you know is struggling with their mental health, you can call Beyond Blue on 1300-224-636. You can also find other links for support in the show notes of this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of our incredible stories, and leave me a review wherever you're listening. I'm Matt Middleton. Catch you again next time.